When you've got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity, this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy and Tulsi Gabbard. She's a Democrat congresswoman from Hawaii. She's also, like every other Democrat office holder, a candidate for president. But she may be one of the few sane voices, particularly with respect to geopolitics, on the left. You may not agree with her, but she's not completely unhinged. She released a campaign ad recently about America's foreign entanglements. This is what Tulsi Gabbard has to say.
The neocons, neolibs, and mainstream media are all singing from the same song sheet, saying, we want war. We need more war. Now, Trump never gets media support unless he's threatening war or carrying out a military action.
You see these beautiful pictures at night. I am tempted to quote the great Leonard Cohen, I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons. They are beautiful pictures of fearsome armaments.
Today, it's Venezuela.
The president has been crystal clear. Military action is possible if that's what's required.
But he needs to understand that a bullet to the forehead may be his way out of Venezuela.
Sometimes one kick at the door and the whole rotten edifice falls down.
Tomorrow, Iran.
I am so pleased that President Trump is letting the Iranian president know there's a new sheriff in town.
Who knows who'll be next? It's no wonder that North Korea won't give up their nuclear weapons. Now, as Commander-in-Chief, I will end these counterproductive, wasteful regime change wars and work to end the new Cold War and nuclear arms race and use our precious resources to care for the needs of the American people. Quality health care, protecting our environment, improving education, rebuilding our infrastructure, and so much more. I humbly ask for your support.
I'm going to go hide behind a rock.
Well, pretty interesting. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat, and by the way, also a veteran, sort of taking a Fortress America approach when it comes to foreign policy, at least at the top line. So what would a Tulsi Gabbard and what will a President Trump, since the rhetoric is not dissimilar, do about North Korea popping off again this week, about the Iranians threatening to abandon nuclear curbs, about the ongoing fighting in Gaza? Well, I know there's a ceasefire, but Hamas and Iran's influence in that region to terrorize the Israeli population. Complicated world. To help us make some sense of it, we're pleased to be joined by Steve Bucci. He served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official. He is currently a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. It's great to be on the show.
So what about North Korea popping off with their sort of customary missile tests? What is to be done there? One scholar, academic, a couple of days ago in the New York Times opined that actually there are more sanctions that could be imposed on North Korea to stifle the regime and to really to really impair Kim Jong-un's ability to operate, including what's been proposed in the name of Otto Warmbier. What is your suggestion for the Trump administration?
Well, first of all, the missile that was fired is not the same kind of missile as was going off a couple of years ago before this engagement with Kim Jong-un began. This is not a long-range strategic missile. It's not even a mid-range missile. It's a short-range tactical device. Obviously, Kim Jong-un is, he's got to perform for his domestic constituency, but he really, really doesn't want to totally blow the relationship out of the water with the United States at this point. So he's trying to stay below a threshold with that. That said, we need to continue to pressure them. President Trump said that, look, either come to the table, start the denuclearization process, or we're going to just continue the sanctions. He really wants Trump to do what all the other presidents have done in the past, which is give up the farm ahead of time on the promise of change and then not do it. Trump doesn't seem to be inclined to do that, and I think that's correct. And if we can up the sanctions, that'd probably be even better.
But do you think President Trump would do that, up the sanctions?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's done it with China. He did it with Syria. I think he'll do it here with Kim Jong-un. There are other things we could do to increase the sanctions. In the past, you've heard other administrations say, oh, we have the toughest sanctions we could possibly have on North Korea. And frankly, it just wasn't true. I won't get into the specifics, but there are other pressure points we could utilize on them, and I think we should. They need to understand if they behave, they get benefits. If they don't behave, they get pressure. That's the way to approach this, not preemptively give up anything or back away from anything before we see movement on the part of Kim Jong-un.
It's so difficult dealing with these totalitarian regimes because you feel for the North Korean people. There's some estimates that the Kim Jong regimes have murdered as many as 3 million people since the mid-1990s. And, you don't want this to happen on your watch as a human being. There was a story out from Reuters that official rations for North Korean people are down to 300 grams per person per day, the lowest ever, because there's a drought. Under 11 ounces a day of food, half of North Koreans chronically short of food. Is there, you sort of, your heart bleeds for those people, and so you want to see if there's anything that can be done in a humanitarian capacity, not unlike the situation in Venezuela. But is there anything that can be done in that direction without necessarily getting some sort of cooperation on the military national security side of it, as you were describing denuclearization?
There really is not. I mean, as much as our hearts would love to say, well, here's a channel, we'll do it through the UN or the Red Cross or somebody, but in a regime like the Kim regime in North Korea, you cannot send anything into that country without the regime drawing the benefit and the people really not getting anything. There's no separate channels that are set up that would allow us to help the common North Korean citizen separate from the government. So anything positive we do will inordinately benefit the regime and the regime thugs that are in there, all the generals and the other folks supporting Kim, and frankly will not benefit the people at all. So as tough as it is, that's the only way we can do it. In Venezuela, there's an alternate channel that we've been trying to use through Mr. Guaido, but that is difficult too because Maduro blocks the whole border.
Right.
So in these situations, it's really hard to take the nice route for the people, the tough route for the government. They kind of blend together, and all the benefit bleeds over to the government.
Well, how many Russian troops are in Venezuela? Do you know?
I don't know the numbers, but estimates are that's fairly significant. And the kind that are there are more than likely they're Spetsnaz guys. This is similar to what happened in Afghanistan just before the Russians invaded. They sent in a bunch of Spetsnaz operators nominally to support the guy who was their buddy. And then very quickly they realized he wasn't going to cut it, so they overthrew him themselves and put somebody else in. I don't think that's liable to happen in Venezuela, but they are definitely propping Maduro up, the Russians and also clearly the Cubans.
And the
even more Cubans soldiers than Russians.
And the Iranians. I mean, this is sort of underappreciated, too. The Iranian influence. Anywhere there is repression going on in the world, Iran is somehow involved. And they are in Venezuela. President Trump expanded the pressure on Iran by imposing sanctions for the first time against the country's industrial metals sector. And that led Rouhani, their dictator, to suggest that Iran is going to abandon limits on stockpiling low-enriched uranium and heavy water, obviously talking about nuclear Iran. What is that combined with, of course, the backing of the terrorist organizations that were firing rockets into Gaza earlier this week? What is your assessment of the president's approach on Iran, taking a hard line, and he continues to turn the screws a little bit tighter. Should that direction continue?
I think he's doing exactly the right thing there. The Iranian nuclear deal was kind of a farce. They're doing what they believe they need to do to keep the pressure off from the Europeans to give them some cover there. But there's no doubt there's stuff going on behind the scenes. And clearly the bigger issue today is their support of terrorism around the region and the world. You're right to say they are the ones who supply the ability to build those rockets by Hamas and the other folks in Gaza. They also are the sole source of support for Hezbollah, which is really the biggest terrorist organization and probably the most dangerous terrorist organization in the world, much more capacity than Al-Qaeda or ISIS or anybody else, and who have frankly killed more Americans. They're the ones who killed all of the Marines in Beirut. So I think that the pressure is positive for us. It's the reason Iran is screaming right now and making these other ridiculous comments. You know, them backing out of the deal, okay, we already backed out of it. We got it. We're going to keep putting pressure, and we're going to put more pressure on our allies to pressure them, as we should, because they are the biggest threat in the region, and as you point out, in some cases outside the region, even as far as Latin America.
So what we've sent a U.S. carrier, near the Persian Gulf because they said that there's a threat, but is this threat real?
I believe it is. That we also, that was a deployment that was going to happen anyway. It got sped up in response to this intelligence that apparently we got through our ally Israel, and it was enough that we diverted Secretary of State Pompeo from his scheduled trip to Europe down to Iraq to talk to officials there. That, in my mind, tells me that the threat against U.S. forces or U.S. interests was probably going to be in western Iraq or possibly the few troops we still have operating in Syria. We got to protect those folks, and this was a clear message to Iran. Not only did we find out about your little plan, but if you do it, or even if you use your proxies, which they tend to try and do, we're going to come and spank you. Now, I know there's a lot of talk, and, Congressman Gabbard says he's not trying to start a war with Iran, but he's not going to let Iran push us around or threaten us. And we need to not allow that to happen. That's kind of what the Obama administration allowed to happen. That's why we gave them all that money, which, they are in turn using to fund these terrorist activities around the world.
He is Stephen Bucci, served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer, top Pentagon official. He's now a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.